For half a century, Reba McEntire has reigned as the unshakable queen of country music. Her voice has filled stadiums, her laughter brightened living rooms through sitcom reruns, and her fearless presence redefined what it meant to be a woman in Nashville. She wore a crown forged from gold records, sold-out tours, and the kind of grit that only legends possess. But behind the dazzling lights, the endless applause, and that radiant smile is a woman scarred by storms that would have broken anyone else. Tragedy has followed her like a shadow, losses so brutal they silenced even her strongest songs. And now, at the age of 70, Reba faces the cruelest wound yet, a heartbreak deeper than any she has ever endured. This is not just another sorrow. This is the darkness she carries today. What really happened to Reba McEntire at 70? Long before she was the queen of country, Reba McEntire was just a little girl growing up in a three-room house on the windswept plains of Oklahoma, where poverty wasn't just present, it was permanent. Born on the 28th of March, 1955, in McAlester and raised in the tiny town of Chalky, she lived on a 7,000-acre ranch that looked endless but offered no luxury. Life there was hard. The family scraped by selling timber, quarrying rocks, and praying the next discovery of natural gas might finally pay the bills. "We didn't even have a phone until I was in 5th grade," Reba once said with a smile that barely hid the ache. Those early years weren't just poor, they were quiet, restrained, and demanding. Her father, Clark McEntire, was a world champion steer roper revered in the rodeo world, feared at home. He rarely spoke, never praised. "Daddy never told us he was proud," Reba recalled. "You just had to assume he was." That silence carved a hole in her heart that she would spend her whole life trying to fill. Her mother, Jacqueline, was softer, more nurturing, but her own heartbreak ran deep. Once a dreamer who longed to sing, Jacqueline gave up her own future to raise 4 kids, but she didn't let the music die. She poured her passion into Reba, teaching her to harmonize long before she could even reach the mic. "Mama taught me to sing," Reba said years later. "I guess I was just carrying her dream forward." It wasn't just a family tradition, it was a quiet inheritance of sacrifice. And by 5 years old, Reba was already up before dawn, hauling feed, helping with cattle, learning the bitter truth. Nothing comes easy. And yet, in the biting Oklahoma winters and the scorching summers, she found a sound that made life feel bigger than the land she was stuck on: music. By 13, Reba McEntire had lived a lifetime of labor. The endless ranch chores, the dust, the quiet ache of a home where love was measured in silence, not words. But that year, in 1968, something shifted. She stepped onto a makeshift stage at a small-town 4-H talent contest, and as her voice filled the room, she felt for the first time that music could take her somewhere her boots never had. She won. It wasn't fame, it wasn't fortune, but it was the spark, a whisper that said, maybe, just maybe, this voice could carry her beyond the fences of Chalky. In those same years, Reba recorded a raw, homemade track, The Ballad of John McEntire, pressed onto just 1,000 vinyl records. A tiny echo from a teenage girl with big dreams and dirt under her fingernails. Most of the world never heard it, but it was the sound of a seed taking root. Alongside her siblings, Paik and Susie, and her ever-hopeful mother, Reba formed the Singing McEntires. They performed in dusty rodeo barns and church socials where the air smelled of hay and heartbreak. The crowds were small, the applause light, but every note they sang came soaked in truth. By the time she was 16, Reba already knew what sacrifice looked like. Her father's silence, her mother's buried dreams, the relentless grind of poverty, but none of it broke her. It hardened her, sharpened her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was singing her way out. It was autumn, 1974. Reba McEntire was just 19 years old, standing under the blinding lights of the National Finals Rodeo in Oklahoma City. The crowd was massive. Her boots trembled on the dirt floor, and then she sang the national anthem. Her voice rang pure, steady, full of grit and grace. It wasn't just a performance, it was a cry from the heart of a girl who had known nothing but struggle. In the stands was country singer Red Steagall, and in that moment, he saw something rare, something worth saving. After the show, he approached Reba and made an offer that would rip her from everything familiar. Come to Nashville. For a girl who'd grown up with oil lamps and no phone, Nashville felt like another universe. She took the leap. In 1975, with her mother by her side, she left behind the ranch, the dirt roads, the only life she'd ever known, and stepped into a city that didn't care about her story. At first, it felt like hope, but the dream turned cold fast. She signed with Mercury Records, expecting salvation. Instead, she was pushed into recording songs that didn't fit her voice, her heart, or her truth. The records flopped. The charts ignored her. The city didn't notice. "I thought I was going back to Oklahoma," she later admitted, eyes heavy with disappointment. It just wasn't working. She was 20 years old, crying in cheap apartments, scraping together dollars, wondering if she'd given everything up for nothing. Every time she visited home, the sky looked wider, the stars brighter, and the failure in her suitcase felt heavier. For nearly 7 years, Reba watched her dreams slip through her fingers like dust, and still she didn't give up. By 1982, Reba McEntire was 27 and broken. 7 years in Nashville had drained her. The dream that once burned so brightly now flickered in silence. Other artists were rising, soaring. Her records? Forgotten. Her fire? Fading. She stood at a painful crossroads. Go home, marry a rancher, and let the music die or hold on. One last time, even if it meant risking everything she had left. She chose to stay. It wasn't courage. It was desperation wrapped in a thin layer of hope. She didn't know it then, but that single choice made in loneliness and tears would change everything. Because in choosing to stay, she found something no record label could ever give her. Her voice. Not the sweet, polished kind they wanted her to sing, but the raw, wounded, soulful voice of a woman who had nearly given up. It wasn't just music anymore. It was survival, and that voice would soon shatter the silence Nashville had buried her under. In 1983, everything changed. After nearly a decade of closed doors and faded dreams, Reba McEntire's single Can't Even Get the Blues shot to #1 on the Billboard country chart. Her first hit, her first real victory. But it wasn't just a song, it was a lifeline. That moment felt like resurrection. A girl who almost gave up was now being heard by the world. Her voice, once silenced by industry politics and wrong songs, finally broke through, and it was unstoppable. A year later, she made the boldest move of her career, leaving Mercury Records, the label that had smothered her, and signing with MCA. For the first time, she took control. No more pretending. No more compromises. She sang what her soul needed to sing: gritty, aching, traditional country. The kind of music her mama once dreamed of singing herself. And from that decision came a storm. Between 1984 and 1987, Reba unleashed hit after hit: How Blue, Somebody Should Leave, Little Rock. Songs that weren't just popular, they were personal. Each lyric felt like it had been cut from the pages of her own heart. The world finally listened. And they didn't just hear a star, they heard a survivor. By 1987, Reba McEntire wasn't just successful, she was unstoppable. 4 consecutive CMA Female Vocalist of the Year awards, sold-out tours, a voice that had clawed its way from silence to stadiums. But her rise wasn't built on glamour, it was built on scars. Her transformation was striking. No longer the cowgirl in boots, now she wore gowns, stepped onto stages with orchestras, commanding audiences with a grace that masked the ghosts still trailing her. Yet beneath the rhinestones and applause, the pain never really left. Her father's silence still echoed. Her mother's abandoned dreams still haunted. And the years of rejection in Nashville still lingered like bruises under makeup. That's what made her different. Her voice carried more than melody. It carried memory of dust, of heartbreak, of almost giving up. Every song felt like a confession. Every performance, a kind of redemption. And the world felt it. They didn't just cheer her, they believed her. But even as the crown of country glittered on her head, Reba knew every crown has a weight, and hers was getting heavier by the day. The 16th of March, 1991. The night should have been ordinary. A quiet evening in San Diego, the tour in full swing. Reba had bronchitis, so she stayed behind at the hotel with her husband, her band 7 dear friends, her tour manager. Her second family boarded a small plane without her. Moments later, the sky split open. The crash was instant, violent, final. No survivors. One routine decision, one skipped flight, had drawn a line between life and death. Reba's body was spared, but her soul shattered. "The rest of my life will never be the same," she later whispered, her voice cracking beneath the weight of that night. The silence afterward wasn't peaceful, it was hollow, suffocating. Narvel held her as she sat frozen in the hotel room, unable to cry, as if grief hadn't fully arrived yet, just dread. When the news hit the world, country radio fell silent. Candlelight vigils flickered across America. But Reba's grief wasn't public, it was personal. Measured not in headlines, but in empty chairs at soundcheck, in laughter she'd never hear again. She could barely step on stage. Every spotlight became a grave, every note an elegy. But she made a promise. Their story wouldn't end in ashes. Later that same year, Reba McEntire walked into the studio, her heart still bleeding, her voice barely holding together. What she recorded wasn't just an album, it was a eulogy. For My Broken Heart wasn't crafted for charts. It was born from pain, every lyric soaked in sorrow. It wasn't music, it was mourning. A farewell to the people who'd shared her stage, her prayers, her life. And yet, when it was released, something extraordinary happened. The album debuted at #1, not because of promotion, not because of hype, but because America could feel it. Her grief, raw, unfiltered, became a mirror for millions who'd also lost someone too soon. She gave words to pain that had no name. She turned silence into song, and in doing so, she helped the world heal while still holding her own broken pieces together. But the ache never left. Decades later, Reba still couldn't sing those songs without her voice catching, her eyes clouding. "You don't get over it," she said softly. "You just learn to live with it." From that wreckage, she didn't just survive, she created something eternal, something beautiful. Proof that even the darkest grief can be reshaped into light if you dare to sing through the tears. 2 years after burying her band, Reba stepped back into the spotlight at the 1993 CMA Awards, not with a song, but with a dress. It was red, bold, daring, a gown that shimmered like fire under the lights. Before she sang a note, the room gasped. In any other industry, it might have been seen as glamour, but in the traditional world of country music, it was scandal. Headlines exploded. Fans wrote letters, some praising, many condemning. Church groups held meetings. The media called it indecent. And Reba? She stood still, stunned. "It was just a dress," she said years later, her smile laced with pain. But to some, it became a reason to forget who I was. What hurt most wasn't the strangers, it was her family. Her mother worried aloud it would stain the McEntire name. Her siblings didn't know what to say. Even her father cracked a dry joke to cut the tension. But behind his words, she saw it, the disapproval, the discomfort. One dress, one night, one woman trying to reclaim her identity after unimaginable grief, and she was judged for it. They didn't know that dress was armor. They didn't know she had worn it not to provoke but to feel alive again. And still, through the firestorm, Reba did what she always had. She stood tall, took the blows, and turned judgment into strength. At 21, Reba McEntire thought she had found stability. She married steer wrestler Charlie Battles in 1976, older, grounded, already a father. To the world, it looked like the perfect match. Country roots, quiet strength, a family in the making. But behind closed doors, the picture cracked. Charlie longed for simplicity, ranch life, stillness, predictability. Reba? She was chasing a dream with fire in her veins. Their paths didn't just diverge, they collided. She bent herself trying to make it work. She tried to shrink, to slow down, to stay. "I think I wanted it to work more than it ever really did," she admitted later, her voice tinged with resignation. For 11 years, she gave everything. But it wasn't enough. In 1987, the marriage ended. No children, just the quiet ache of a woman who had loved deeply but never been truly seen. The divorce didn't make headlines, but it left a mark. She walked away childless, heart bruised, and carrying yet another wound, this time not from fate or fame, but from the silent unraveling of a love she once believed would last. And yet again, Reba chose not to collapse. She chose to rise. Then came what felt like redemption. In 1989, Reba married Brandon Blackstock, her steel guitarist, her manager, her confidant. Together, they built more than a career, they built a fortress. Starstruck entertainment, sold-out tours, a blended family that felt whole. Narvel's 3 children became hers, and in 1990, Reba gave birth to Shelby, her only biological child, her heart outside her body. "Motherhood changed me completely," she said softly. "It gave me purpose beyond the stage." For more than 2 decades, they were a country music power couple. Fans believed they were untouchable, that if anyone could defy the curse of celebrity marriages, it was them. But in 2015, the foundation cracked. Quietly, without warning, Narvel asked for a divorce. 26 years of love, laughter, trust gone. The world gasped. But Reba's gasp was silent, swallowed in private pain. The financial loss was massive, nearly $50 million, but it wasn't the money that broke her. It was the cold side of the bed, the empty house, the echo where love used to live. "The divorce was not my idea," she admitted. "I didn't want it, not in any way." Oh, to everyone else, she looked strong, composed, but inside, it felt like another kind of death. Not of a person, but of a future she thought was forever. She stood on stage before thousands but had never felt more alone. Still, she didn't cancel, didn't retreat. She kept showing up not because she was okay, but because she refused to let heartbreak define her ending. To the world, Reba McEntire was a superstar. But behind the spotlight, she was something far more fragile, a mother, quietly terrified for her child. In 1990, at the peak of her fame, she gave birth to Shelby Stephen McEntire Blackstock. It looked like a fairy tale, the queen of country cradling her little prince. But fairy tales don't prepare you for reality. As Shelby grew, the worries multiplied. He was later diagnosed with ADHD, a condition that made focus, confidence, and control a daily uphill battle. For Reba, whose world was built on relentless discipline and self-drive, this new reality was heartbreaking. She rarely spoke about it publicly, but in interviews, her voice would soften. "As a mother, you just worry," she once said, "every single day." Homework became tears. Confidence came and went like a ghost. And Reba, the woman who faced down Nashville's toughest critics, often found herself undone by the sight of her son struggling to believe in himself. "I wanted to fix everything," she whispered once. "But you can't. You can only love them through it." And so she did, fiercely, quietly, completely. Then, slowly, Shelby began to rise. Not in music, but in racing. Fast cars, finish lines, focus. Against the odds, he carved his own path, one that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with grit. Her grit, every lap he completed was a prayer answered. Every finish line a victory over every fear she had once whispered in the dark. "I'm so proud of him," she said, tears in her eyes. "He's worked harder than most people will ever know." But even as he succeeded, the worry never left. The questions still echoed in her heart. Will he be okay? Will the world treat him kindly? These are the wounds only mothers carry, quiet, invisible, endless. In March 2020, just as the world was locking down, Reba McEntire lost the one person whose voice had shaped her more than any other, her mother, Jacqueline. She was 93. A long life, yes, but Reba wasn't ready. No child ever is. This wasn't just a passing. It was the unraveling of the thread that had tied Reba to her beginnings, to the dust, the sacrifice, the music. Jacqueline had once dreamed of being a singer. That dream never came true for her, but she passed it on like a sacred flame. Reba grew up learning harmonies by her mother's side, her earliest lullabies echoing through the Oklahoma winds. That bond, voice to voice, heart to heart, was unbreakable, and now it was gone. Worse, the world was in lockdown. The pandemic robbed Reba of the chance to say goodbye properly. No gathering, no funeral, just silence, loneliness, distance. Even at 70, she said, her voice trembling, I felt like a little girl suddenly unmoored. The woman who had helped her survive poverty, pain, and every heartbreak was now only a memory. Her presence lingered in Reba's home, in family prayers, in melodies. But she wasn't there. She's everywhere, Reba said, but she's not here. And that paradox, a love so large, now only visible in absence, became a private ache Reba carried with her into every performance. On stage, she smiled, but behind it, she was simply a daughter, grieving her mother in a world that didn't pause to notice. As Reba McEntire quietly mourned her mother in 2020, another wound was forming, this time in public view. After decades of being a unifying voice in country music, she took stances that some longtime fans didn't agree with. In a world more divided than ever, even compassion became controversial. And suddenly, the woman who had sung through grief, who had offered comfort in the darkest nights, found herself being pushed away. Critics spoke out. Radio stations grew distant. Some fans, the very ones who had walked with her through tragedy, triumph, and transformation, turned their backs. It was its own kind of grief. Not loud, not immediate, but slow and hollowing. The kind that makes you question your place in the world you helped build. At a time when Reba needed connection the most, she felt the sting of silence. The cheers had faded in certain places. The warmth of a loyal audience now mixed with the chill of judgment. It wasn't about popularity. It was about identity. She had never sung to be famous. She sang to heal, to connect. And now, that bond felt cracked. In her home, her mother's chair sat empty. On stage, applause sometimes rang with a little less certainty. And in her heart, there was a growing solitude, one built not just from loss, but from the betrayal of those she thought would always stay. She leaned on Shelby, on prayer, on the music that had always saved her before. But even in resilience, the loneliness felt sharp, because the hardest thing about heartbreak isn't losing strangers. It's losing the people who once knew every lyric and suddenly stopped listening. By 2025, Reba McEntire had already weathered more pain than most hearts could carry. The death of her band, her divorce, the loss of her mother, public rejection, but nothing prepared her for what came next. On the 7th of August, 2025, Brandon Blackstock, her former stepson, the boy she had helped raise, the man she had loved like her own, died at just 48. Malignant melanoma, aggressive, unforgiving. Seizures had weakened him in his final days. And when the call came from Montana, it wasn't just a tragedy, it was devastation. Reba didn't just lose a family member, she lost a son. She had embraced Brandon as a child, watched him grow, cheered his milestones, prayed through his setbacks. He wasn't blood, but he was bonded. Family by love, not lineage. And that love ran deep. I don't understand why the Lord took him, she whispered to a close friend, her voice cracking under the weight. He had so much more life left. The world grieved. Flowers poured in. Fans mourned alongside her. But this pain wasn't meant for public stages. It lived in the quiet of her home, in the chair Brandon used to sit in the photo that now stared back at her like a wound, in the silence where laughter used to live. The cruelest irony? Just 5 years earlier, she had lost her mother. Now she was mourning a son. one she never expected to bury. "I feel like the ground keeps shifting under me," she admitted softly. "You think you've survived the worst, and then something worse comes along." And still, Reba stood. Not unshaken, but unbroken. Brandon's death didn't just reopen old wounds, it carved a new one, deeper than all the rest. Reba had long known the weight of survivors' guilt. After the 1991 plane crash, she spent years asking why she was spared. Now, that haunting question returned with even more force. Why Brandon? Why now? Friends said she barely slept. Her days were heavy, her prayers constant. But even through the fog of grief, Reba did what she's always done. She chose grace. She spoke of Brandon with tenderness, never anger. Honored him quietly, not through press releases, but through love, through presence. She clung to Shelby, leaned on faith, and let music be her lifeline once more. In public, she smiled, but her eyes carried something different now. Softer, wiser, wounded. Fans who saw her said she seemed both fragile and radiant, because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply stands when standing feels impossible. Brandon's passing didn't just leave an empty space in her family, it pierced the very center of her heart. And yet, through that pain, Reba revealed her truest form. A woman who has lost and lost and lost again, but still sings, still gives, still rises. She wasn't just surviving tragedy, she was transforming it. At 70, Reba McEntire should be basking in legacy, celebrated for decades of music, television, philanthropy, and strength. And she is. But that legacy is not just written in gold records or Hall of Fame plaques. It's etched in scars. She lives in Nashville now, with actor Rex Linn, her partner, her calm after countless storms. Her house is filled with memories, framed awards, old stage costumes, family photos, and now, the aching silence where Brandon's voice used to be. The tragedies are undeniable: her band in 1991, her marriage in 2015, her mother in 2020, and her beloved Brandon in 2025. Any one of them could have ended her, but none of them did. Instead, Reba transformed each heartbreak into something that gave back. For My Broken Heart became an anthem for the grieving. Her sitcom Reba gave laughter to the lonely. Reba's place in Oklahoma became a gathering spot for music and community. Her work with Feeding America, Habitat for Humanity, and Reba's Ranch House gave comfort to those in need. She's not slowing down. In 2025, she returned to television with Happy's Place, sat in the red chair as a coach on The Voice, and stood on stage hosting the Academy of Country Music Awards. She even sang at Super Bowl 58, a living legend, still leading, still shining. And yet, the real Reba isn't just the performer. She's the woman who whispered prayers over a child with ADHD, the daughter who mourned in isolation, the stepmother who lost a son she never stopped loving. "I've earned every line on my face," she once said. And it's true, because each one tells a story of loss, love, survival, and strength. Reba McEntire is not just the queen of country music. She is the living proof that even when life shatters us over and over, we can still stand, still sing, still give. And in doing so, remind the rest of us that we're not alone in our pain. As long as Reba's voice exists, no one who suffers ever sings alone. When you step back and look at the life of Reba McEntire, what you see isn't just the arc of a superstar. It's the soul of a woman who has been broken and still chose to rise. For nearly 5 decades, she has stood before us, sometimes in rhinestones, sometimes in tears, sometimes smiling through unimaginable pain, always human, always real. Her crown wasn't handed to her. It was earned through scraped knees, sleepless nights, and standing in the wreckage of her own grief. Every note she's sung, every stage she's walked, every heartbreak she's survived, it's all been part of a larger story. Not about fame, not about fortune, but about endurance. She turned poverty into passion, silence into sound, grief into grace. She didn't just change country music, she redefined what strength looks like in a woman's body, in a mother's heart, in a survivor's voice. And maybe that's the real miracle of Reba, that after everything she's lost, she still gives, she still sings, she still believes. And because of that, because she never quit, millions of others have found the courage not to quit either. She is more than a queen of country. She is a lighthouse for the broken,